Thank you, everyone. It's really exciting to be here. I love CAP. I love the work that everyone here does. I especially want to thank Neera for her extraordinary talent and leadership and vision. She's making a huge difference here. I'm humbled to be speaking here at the Progressive Party, following many amazing people in their footsteps. I am very honored to share the stage later tonight with a great progressive champion, Vice President Biden. Mr. Vice President Biden, thank you for your moral courage. Thank you for your leadership. We now are almost a decade into our long and tiring fight against recession and economic decay. And there is no doubt in my mind that our economy is recovering. The statistics that economists use to gauge progress, GDP, unemployment, exports, they are trending in the right direction. But statistics don't tell the whole story. If you zoom into the individual level to any family in New York who's just trying to get by, well, the story they will tell you is quite different. Sure, a guy might have a full-time, long-term employment now, but why is he still living below the poverty line? A laid-off woman was finally rehired, but why isn't she being paid the same amount as a man doing the same job, even in jobs traditionally dominated by women, like nursing or teaching? Tonight we have the opportunity to pause from our old routines and reflect on what we're actually doing, or what we actually should be doing, or what we could be doing better for the millions of Americans out there who don't have expensive lobbyists to come to Washington and make their case. The United States is still the biggest economy on earth, and there's certainly no lack of wealth in this country. But there has never been a lack of wealth in this country. What we need to be thinking about is what happens when you aren't wealthy. What happens when you work 40 hours a week, or 50, or 60, but you still can't actually feed your kids without the help of food stamps? What happens when you experience the joy of a new baby, but childcare is so expensive that the only way you can get your infant and your self-sufficient care is you quit your job, go on Medicaid, and receive WIC? What happens when you finish your college degree and you are ready to move up and move on, but your student loans have left you so far buried in debt that you can't afford a house, you can't afford a car, you can't afford to start a family. You just can't afford to start your adult life. We're in a moment now that's very similar to where this country stood 80 years ago. 80 years ago, our country reemerged from the ashes of the Great Depression. FDR framed this challenge not in terms of small fixes or incremental changes, but he wanted to write an American history. Days before his 1936 election, he went in front of a screaming crowd at Madison Square Garden in New York. He had to explain to the American people why it is so fundamentally important for the future of the United States and its middle class that our nation not veer from its progressive agenda. His critics were harsh. They were well organized. They were extraordinarily wealthy. But Roosevelt wasn't just undaunted. He was emboldened by that challenge. Listen to what he said about the people around him who refused to fight hard enough or at all for those well off. He said they had, quote, begun to consider the government of the United States as a mere appendage to their own affairs. He said, and we know now that government by organized money is as dangerous as government by organized mob. And he said of his critics to those who pose to a government that serves all of its citizens, he said, they are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred. Are any of us here as bold as Franklin Roosevelt was 80 years ago? Are any of us brave enough to have the proposals he had and the ideas necessary for this nation to move forward? Are we willing to speak out loudly as he was for progressive values? When we get asked, what does America stand for? Do we have a clear answer? Let me tell you one story. A few weeks ago when I was in upstate New York, I met with a woman. Her name was Sheila. She was a veteran. She served our country, would die for our country. She had 2 part-time jobs just to make ends meet, and her son was diagnosed with leukemia. So Sheila, along with 87% of all Americans, didn't have paid leave. That meant that Sheila had a choice, a very hard choice. Was she going to quit her job and stay home with her son as he was dying of cancer? Or was she going to stay at work so she could still put food on the table and pay her bills? Well, she didn't actually have a choice. She had to feed her family and pay her bills. So she was not there as her son deteriorated and when he died. Anyone with the slightest sense of compassion would be moved by this story. All workers in America should have paid family and medical leave, not just the 13% lucky enough to have it. Because this issue is not just a moral issue. It's not just about injustice. It's not just about fairness. This issue is a major economic issue that is far-reaching as you can possibly imagine. We are just months away from the kickoff of the first primaries for 2006. We have less than 2 years from this election, 2016. Every candidate in this election, presidential and otherwise, should be asked the question, do you support paid family and medical leave? You don't need to study the polling data. You do not need to study the statistics. You just need to talk to regular American families like those in New York. It's not dissimilar from what it was in 1936. If you were not born into opportunity, if you were not born into economic security, can you still achieve it? Can you still achieve the American dream? Is it still real? When you're out and about here in Washington or wherever else you are, talk to a mother, talk to a student, talk to someone who just earned their nursing degree. You'll hear from them. Middle-class economics are not going to make or break the next election. They are going to make or break our future as a nation. So for all the problem solvers that are here today, you should be invigorated by this. This is a challenge. This is our moment to actually introduce big, bold ideas to the American people. It's our moment to actually write the next American history. For such deep, fundamental questions about the state of this country, we must stop thinking so small. We have to be bold. We have to have the courage of our convictions, and we have to move forward. So here is an idea for all of you. Let us have a national policy where every man and every woman who works has access to paid family and medical leave. A national program that guarantees when your loved one gets sick, when a parent is dying in the hospital, when any mother or father has a new baby, a national program that works for American families who need it and is available for life's inevitable emergencies. Paid leave is not just an issue that will unite us, it will unite the electorate, but it actually accelerates our economy and helps us reach our full potential. Here are the economics. Right now, because we don't have paid leave in this country, when a man has to leave the workforce, he loses $284,000 in his lifetime in wages and Social Security benefits. For a woman, she will lose $324,000 in wages and retirement. For the economics of that, that means less spending power, less investment in our companies, in our businesses. It actually puts an artificial drag on the economy. Now, California and other states have already done this. California has a paid leave policy in place for a decade. And we've surveyed the businesses and the populace, and I can tell you, overwhelmingly is supported. 90% of businesses said that having paid leave had a positive or at least no negative impact on their profits, productivity, and retention, and 99% said it had a boost in morale. Now, despite this evidence and despite these facts, too many people that we know have never really thought through this policy. Most policymakers here in Washington are too affluent to have ever experienced the challenges of not having paid leave. Some in Congress have never been a primary caregiver, picked an infant up from daycare, or done the work necessary to care for families. Or maybe they just lack empathy. And others might agree with paid leave in principle, but actually aren't willing to take the political risk that would come with advocating for a broad, comprehensive plan. Paid leave is smart, it's pragmatic, it's progressive. It's a policy that would make our economy strong and our families stronger. So if we're going to talk about lifting up the middle class, we will be completely missing the point if paid leave is not a fundamental part of that conversation. We are the only industrialized country in the world that doesn't have paid leave. The only. We are last next to Papua New Guinea. Is this really who we are as a nation? My proposal for the Family Act would finally change this with a nationwide paid family and medical leave insurance program. It's an earned benefit that travels with you across your lifetime, regardless of where you work, big business, small business, part-time, full-time. And do you know how much it costs? It costs the cost of a cup of coffee a week by you and by your employee and by your employer. Now, if you're an employer, would you not pay the cost of a cup of coffee a week to retain that employee, to keep morale high, to keep productivity high? You would. That means you don't have to choose between a paycheck and a family with an emergency. Now, for your employer, it means a more stable workplace, a more productive workplace, and it reduced the cost of training new workers. So let's finally say goodbye to the Mad Men era when our workplace policies were actually written. Let's embrace a policy that a national magazine just published a cover story that said, quote, "Paid leave goes from progressive pipe dream to political reality," unquote. So let us create this political reality. Let's get off the sidelines. Let's get out of our comfort zones, and let's build an America that lives up to its dream. Thank you, everyone.